There is a silence beneath all sound, a stillness deeper than any peace you have ever known. It does not announce itself with thunder, nor arrive with fanfare. It is soft, like the hush before dawn, ancient, like the breath of the stars. And in that silence, if you are very still, very open, very surrendered, you will hear it, not with your ears, but with the soul behind your ribs. You have spoken to God, haven't you? In whispered prayers on tired nights, in desperate pleas when all else failed, in gratitude so full it broke you open. And perhaps you thought that was the end of the conversation. That prayer was the full extent of the dialogue. But there is more. There is another voice, one that does not come from you but moves through you. A voice not born of thought, but of knowing. It is what we call intuition. And intuition is not you talking to God. Intuition is God talking to you. It does not shout. It will never compete with the noise. It will not argue with your mind. It waits gently until you remember to be still enough to listen. This is the great reversal. We were taught to reach for answers outside of ourselves, to consult the world, to ask the experts. But the sacred truth, the liberating, terrifying, empowering truth, is that the guidance you seek is not elsewhere. It is already within. Not because you are special, but because you are divine. You always have been. You only forgot. And so you pray. Beautiful. Prayer is the soul's exhale, the sacred yearning turned into words, the humble bow of a heart remembering its source. But prayer is only half of the miracle. The other half is listening. And listening requires surrender, not to a dogma, not to a belief system, but to the mysterious presence within you that always knows. The one who already sees the path, even when your eyes are clouded by fear. The one who whispers, "This way," even when logic screams, "That way." The one who asks for your trust, not because it needs it, but because you do. You have called this presence many names: soul, higher self, spirit, but it is all one voice, all one current, all one divine intelligence expressing itself through your unique form. And when you stop demanding that life make sense on your terms, when you stop insisting that the mind alone should lead, that voice rises. It is not new. It did not arrive when you became spiritual. It did not show up after the healing began. It was there in childhood when you followed what felt good without explanation. It was there in moments of crisis when something told you to turn left instead of right. It was there in the stillness between heartbreaks, holding you together while you fell apart. This voice, this intuition, is not learned. It is remembered. And when you remember, you awaken. You awaken not into new information, but into the felt experience that you are not separate from the source, that you have never been, that every breath is divine, that every moment carries the guidance you seek if you are only willing to slow down enough to feel it. You were taught to pray up as if God were far above. But God is not far. God is nearer than your next breath, closer than your next thought, more intimate than your next heartbeat. When you pray, you are not speaking to something outside yourself. You are turning inward toward the infinite that lives and moves and has its being within you. And when you hear that whisper, the one that makes no sense to the mind but feels like truth in the bones you are being spoken to, that is God's reply. That is intuition, and it is holy. You were not sent here to navigate life with only your five senses. You were not born to depend solely on maps drawn by others. The divine, in its infinite love, placed within you a compass, a sacred, silent knowing that cannot be proven, only trusted. It is not loud, because truth does not shout. It is not dramatic, because love does not perform. But it is always there, constant, clear, a presence that guides not through fear, but through resonance. It doesn't explain, it confirms. It doesn't argue, it aligns. When you hear it, it feels like a breath you didn't know you were holding has finally been released. And yet, how often have you doubted it? How often have you silenced the whisper because it did not make sense? Because it contradicted what others expected? Because it didn't fit the narrative you were taught to follow? You chose logic over love. Safety over surrender. Approval over authenticity. And still the whisper remained, not to punish you, not to control you, but because it is your birthright, your inheritance. The still small voice of God, echoing through your being, waiting to be remembered. Intuition is not a superpower for the gifted few. It is the native language of your soul. It is not mystical. It is natural. Not magical. It is inevitable. Every creature in the forest follows it. Every wave in the ocean honors it. Every star obeys it. Only humans have forgotten, because only humans have been taught to fear the inner voice more than the outer noise. But the moment you return to that voice, truly return, something miraculous happens. The world no longer feels like a maze. Your choices no longer feel like burdens. Your path no longer feels like a mystery. Because you are no longer trying to figure it all out, you are allowing it to unfold from within. This is not passivity. This is power. This is not blindness. This is vision. The kind of vision that sees not with the eyes, but with the heart. The kind that recognizes truth without needing to prove it. The kind that does not require evidence, because it already knows. There is a kind of wisdom that cannot be learned, only received. A wisdom that flows in when the mind grows quiet and the heart becomes soft. That wisdom is the voice of God speaking through your intuition. And it does not come to control you, but to liberate you. It says you are not lost. You are being led. It says you are not broken. You are breaking open. It says you are not alone. I have always been here. The ego will argue. It will demand clarity. It will seek guarantees. But intuition offers none of that. Intuition offers only the next breath, the next step, the next nudge toward love. And that is enough. That is always enough. Because when you follow the whisper, you walk not by sight, but by faith, not faith in an idea, but faith in a presence that lives and breathes through you. You don't need to understand it. You need only to trust it. You don't need to explain it to others. You need only to honor it within yourself. And when you do, life begins to organize itself around your alignment. Not instantly, not always comfortably, but undeniably, doors open, people appear, events align, not because you manipulated them into place, but because you return to the current of life that was always flowing in your favor. Every time you honor your intuition, you deepen your conversation with God. Every time you listen to that still small voice, you affirm that you are not alone, that you are not abandoned, that you are not separate from the infinite. You are the infinite, expressed through form, guided from within, protected by a presence that knows the entire map even when you see only one step. Prayer is the sacred offering of your truth to the divine. Intuition is the divine's sacred reply. And it is time you listen. There is something sacred that begins to unfold when you stop needing signs and start trusting the stirrings. When you no longer wait for the world to confirm your path, but simply walk it because it feels like home. You see, intuition is not here to make sense, it is here to make you whole. It does not arrive to convince the mind. It arises to awaken the soul. It speaks in the language of resonance, not rationale. It moves in the direction of alignment, not approval. It is the voice of the infinite, reminding the finite self that it was never truly small. And yet we are taught to override this voice with noise, with data, with the opinions of those who do not live in our skin. We are told to mistrust the unseen, to bow only to what can be measured and proven. But what is proof to a soul that knows? What is evidence to a heart that remembers? The deepest truths of your life, the ones that shaped you, healed you, transformed you, they did not come with blueprints. They came as sudden clarity, as quiet recognition, as the undeniable knowing that something sacred was moving through you. You are not meant to navigate this life by logic alone. You are meant to feel your way through like a blindfolded child walking a path guided only by light within. That inner light is not fragile, it is eternal. And every time you honor it, your path becomes less about striving and more about surrendering, less about controlling outcomes and more about aligning with origins. Intuition is not another tool in your toolbox. It is the thread that connects you to the whole. It is how the divine breathes into your daily life. Not in grand visions or angelic choirs, but in simple nudges, a sudden unease that pulls you back from danger, a gentle push to speak up when silence feels safer, a quiet peace that settles over you when you finally say yes to what your soul has been whispering all along. You may call it guidance, but it is more than that. It is communion. It is your part of the conversation with the infinite. You are not just receiving wisdom, you are remembering it. You are not just being led, you are being reunited with your own divine rhythm. And that rhythm does not falter. It does not lie. It does not change with the weather of your emotions. It remains steady, even as the waves rise. When you live by intuition, your life becomes less about seeking answers and more about trusting the questions. You stop demanding certainty and begin cultivating faith, not blind faith, but sacred recognition. Recognition that life is not random, that your presence here is not accidental, and that the compass within you is not faulty. It is flawless. It is ancient. It is the echo of the source within your own soul. And when you move from that space, when your steps are not dictated by fear but directed by alignment, you begin to understand that success is not a destination. It is a frequency. Peace is not the reward at the end of obedience. It is the companion of authenticity. Joy is not reserved for those who achieve enough. It is the inheritance of those who trust enough. You will never find your path in another's certainty. You will find it in your own sacred uncertainty, where the mind lets go and the heart takes the lead. Where you are no longer navigating life like a battlefield, but dancing through it like a sacred ceremony. Where each moment becomes less about proving and more about presence. For this is what it means to live from within. Not to reject the world, but to no longer be governed by it. Not to abandon reason, but to let reason follow intuition, not lead it. You are not here to be guided solely by what others have seen. You are here to awaken to what only you can feel. And what you feel, what rises from the silence of your own soul, that is where God speaks. There comes a point in every awakened life when the external noise becomes unbearable, not because it grows louder, but because the soul grows quieter. It is not that the world becomes more chaotic, but that your inner ear becomes more attuned to harmony. And the disharmony of outer demands, the deadlines, the expectations, the identities you've outgrown begin to fall out of tune with your essence. This dissonance is not a problem to fix. It is a signal, a sacred calling. It is your intuition alerting you. The time has come to return home. Not to the home built of bricks and borders, but to the home behind your ribs, the sanctuary that cannot be seen but can be felt, the temple not made with hands but with presence. Your intuition is the voice that lives in that home. It is not concerned with how things appear. It is only concerned with whether you are aligned. And alignment is not performance, it is integrity. It is not being right, it is being real. And so you begin to notice things you once ignored. The fatigue that isn't just tiredness, it's your soul saying no. The longing that isn't just dissatisfaction, it's your soul pulling you toward truth. The discomfort that doesn't mean you're broken, it means you're expanding. Your intuition speaks not in commands, but in currents. It does not demand, it draws. It does not scold, it nudges. And the more you honor it, the more the world around you begins to shift. What once felt essential validation, applause, conformity begins to feel empty. What once seemed risky slowness, solitude, honesty begins to feel like salvation. You are not becoming someone else. You are shedding the noise that kept you from yourself. This is not reinvention, it is remembrance. And what you remember is that you were never meant to live by default. You were meant to live by design, not someone else's design, divine design, sacred design, your soul's design. When you start following this inner voice, life does not necessarily get easier, but it does become lighter. There may still be grief, but it will no longer drown you. There may still be uncertainty, but it will no longer paralyze you. Because something within you knows you are no longer alone on this path. You never were. You are no longer forcing your way through. You are being led by a presence that does not sleep. Led by a voice that never forgets who you are, even when you do. And this voice, your intuition, does not promise comfort. It promises truth. It will not protect you from every wound, but it will ensure that every wound becomes sacred. That every experience, whether celebrated or mourned, will become part of the tapestry being woven through you. You will look back on decisions that made no sense to your mind, yet felt undeniably right. You will look back on the moments you said yes to something invisible, only to realize later that it was your soul saying yes to itself. That is what intuition does. It bypasses the intellect, bypasses the fear, and speaks directly to the truth of who you are becoming. It does not operate in timelines, it does not check the clocks. It speaks from eternity and guides you moment by moment into more of yourself. This is why we must learn to listen again, not casually but reverently, as if every whisper were a scripture, as if every nudge were a verse in the gospel of your own becoming. Because it is. Because the sacred does not only live in holy books, it lives in your breath. It lives in the way your heart speeds up when truth draws near. It lives in the goosebumps that rise when your spirit hears something it recognizes. That recognition is intuition. And that intuition is God reminding you, I am here, not up there. In here, not someday. Now. And the now is holy. The now is where the conversation unfolds. The now is where heaven is not a destination but a vibration, a frequency you tune into when you quiet the noise and open your heart to what's already been whispering all along. There comes a season in your awakening where you begin to trust without proof, to move without permission, to speak without rehearsing. Not because you become reckless, but because you become rooted. The roots of your being no longer cling to the soil of public opinion or borrowed beliefs. They drink instead from the subterranean river of divine knowing. And when that river begins to flow freely through you, intuition no longer feels like guidance, it feels like breath. Natural, necessary, effortless. It is not a separate voice you hear, it is your own voice, uncluttered by fear. It is not a foreign signal you interpret, it is your natural frequency, finally uninterrupted. You do not need to decode it. You only need to stop distorting it. The distortions come from the noise, the conditioning that told you to mistrust yourself, to look outward for confirmation, to abandon your truth in exchange for temporary safety. But what is safety if it costs your soul? What is approval if it requires silence where your voice was meant to rise? And so intuition begins, not as thunder, but as tremor, a small vibration in your chest, a subtle warmth in your belly, a shift in energy that says this is the way, not with certainty, but with clarity, not with maps, but with magnetism. You feel drawn, pulled, guided, not by logic's hand, but by love's invitation. This is the sacred geometry of your spirit at work. An invisible architecture, building a life from within, shaping choices not from scarcity, but from wholeness. You begin to live from alignment rather than reaction. And in that space, miracles become normal. Not the grand gestures that defy physics, but the quiet recalibrations that defy fear. A person you needed appears. A door gently closes that was never yours. A long-awaited peace begins to rest in your body. Not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer resisting what is. You are in union with a current, and in this current, prayer and intuition merge. Prayer is no longer a performance, it is a posture, a sacred yielding. You no longer ask to be saved, you ask to be shown. You no longer beg for a plan, you open to the path that is already forming beneath your feet. You begin to understand that you were never meant to manipulate your life into place. You were meant to tune into its unfolding. This unfolding is not passive, it is profoundly alive. You still act, you still choose, you still create. But no longer from panic, no longer from scarcity. Your movements become extensions of your essence, not reactions to your fear. You no longer strive to be seen, you radiate from having seen yourself. You no longer push to be heard, you speak from the echo of something eternal that already said, you are. And in that echo, you remember, you are not here to be anything other than what you already are. You are not a project to be perfected, you are a presence to be embodied. The more you shed the need to become, the more you return to being. And being is the most revolutionary act in a world addicted to becoming. Being is not stillness for stillness' sake. It is stillness that reveals motion born of truth. This is the rhythm intuition leads you into. Not a sprint, not a retreat, but a dance. Sometimes bold, sometimes still, but always synchronized with the divine music that only you can hear. And if others do not hear it, bless them. They are dancing to their own sacred song. You do not need agreement to walk your path. You need integrity. And intuition is the compass that ensures that integrity remains intact. When you live like this, you do not become immune to pain, but you become fluent in its messages. You do not avoid the dark, but you no longer mistake it for the absence of light. You see that the night too is sacred, that the unknown is not an enemy, but a womb. That intuition often sounds like silence, because silence is where the deepest truths emerge. You begin to reframe uncertainty not as a void, but as a sanctuary. Not as failure, but as freedom. You stop needing every step to be lit because you trust the source of the light within you. And you stop looking at others to tell you who you are because you've heard the whisper for yourself. You've felt the sacred pull. You've touched the river of truth that flows beneath all things. And once you touch it, you can never go back. So you bless the questions, you honor the pauses, you walk into the unknown, not with fear, but with reverence. And as you do, you no longer just believe in God, you become aware that you are being breathed by God, that each moment of alignment is a holy dialogue, that each intuitive nudge is not random, it is revelation. The divine does not speak in lightning bolts, it speaks in you. You are the continuation of the prayer. You are the unfolding answer. Because what begins as a whisper becomes a way of life. At first, it is delicate, a flicker in the wind, a barely noticeable pull in the chest, a subtle vibration that trembles just beneath thought. But the more you follow it, the more you find that it never truly leaves. It grows not louder, but truer, not more forceful, but more constant. And you, the once hesitant listener, become its sacred companion. You become the tuning fork for divine intelligence. You stop searching for miracles because your life becomes one, not because everything is perfect, but because everything is aligned. There is no separation between the spiritual and the ordinary. That was a myth you were sold by a world that did not yet know its own holiness. But the soul remembers. It always remembers. That sacred stillness is not reserved for mountaintops or monasteries. It lives in the grocery line, in the way you speak to the stranger, in the pause before you answer your child. Intuition begins to shape your presence, and your presence becomes your offering. You realize that the divine does not want performance. It wants participation. It wants you as you are, where you are, attuned and available. And this is when life starts to rearrange itself, not because you forced it, but because you finally aligned with what was true all along. Relationships shift. Some fall away with grace, some with thunder, but always something clearer arises in their place. Work begins to feel different, no longer just a task, but an extension of your frequency. Your inner life becomes your compass, and your outer world becomes a mirror. You stop managing appearances and start stewarding energy. You begin to care less about how things look and more about how they feel. This is the beginning of real power. You see, the world cannot give you what it did not place in you. And what is in you, this sacred intuition, this divine inner knowing, was not planted by man. It was placed there by the same intelligence that paints sunsets without ever asking for applause. And like the sunset, your job is not to be understood. It is to be true. You are not here to fit in, but to radiate. And that radiance comes not from effort, but from trust. Not from striving, but from surrender. Intuition is the art of surrendering to the frequency of your own truth, over and over again, until your whole life hums with the resonance of the real. There is an unmistakable peace that comes when you begin to trust the voice within more than the voices without. Not a peace that ignores pain, but one that makes space for it. Not a peace that bypasses life, but one that breathes through it. This peace does not mean the absence of challenge, it means the presence of alignment. And alignment is everything. When you are aligned, your steps are guided, your speech is purposeful, your silence is sacred. You no longer need to rush into the next moment to feel whole, because you have returned to the only place where life truly happens. Now, and here in this sacred now, you begin to hear God not just in intuition, but in everything. In the way the trees lean into the wind, in the way grief opens you without warning, in the way laughter breaks through your weariness like sunlight through storm clouds. You realize that the voice of the divine is not distant, it is present in the marrow of each moment, if only you dare to be present with it. And so prayer changes too. It is no longer just asking, it becomes listening. No longer just speaking, it becomes surrendering. You stop praying for outcomes and start praying for alignment. You stop asking for life to bend to your will and start opening to the will that already knows your path more intimately than you ever could. Prayer becomes less of a request and more of a relationship. And in that relationship, intuition becomes your sacred language. The subtle way the infinite speaks through the finite, leading you not toward perfection, but toward presence. And in presence, you remember, you were never chasing clarity, you were chasing connection. Not connection to a plan, but to a presence. Not to answers, but to awareness. And now here you are, not at the end, but in the center. Not finished, but finally beginning, not beginning, a new life, but beginning to live the one that has always been yours. You were never meant to navigate alone, because prayer is you talking to God, and intuition is God talking to you. There will come a time, and perhaps that time is now, when you will stop asking if you are on the right path and begin to trust that the path is made right by your presence upon it. You will no longer wonder if you've missed your purpose, for you will have realized your purpose is to be aligned with your inner truth, and that truth is forever unfolding. You are not a traveler chasing destinations. You are the awakening of the road itself. Each step you take in alignment with your intuition is a step into sacred ground. And sacred ground is not somewhere you arrive at, it's what you create with your presence. And so the old way of living begins to fall away, not with a crash, but with a sigh. The self that had to prove, to chase, to earn, to be seen, it begins to dissolve like mist in the morning Sunday. What remains is not a smaller you, but the real you. The you that does not need to be explained because it is felt. The you that does not need to be defended because it is truth. The you that does not shout because it radiates. This self does not hunger because it remembers, I am already what I seek. I do not need to find the divine. I am a living expression of it. In this remembrance, life softens. Not because challenges disappear, but because you stop struggling against them. You begin to see even difficulty as divine orchestration, not punishment, but preparation. Not chaos, but calling. And your intuition continues to guide you, not as a roadmap, but as a rhythm. Not as a loud announcement, but as a gentle direction, felt only when you are still enough to receive. And what does it mean to be still? It means to stop fleeing, to stop rushing toward futures that promise what your own soul already holds. To stop escaping the present moment as though your divinity were waiting somewhere else. Stillness is not the absence of motion, it is the fullness of presence. And presence is where the voice of God is clearest, because God does not need to shout when you are already listening. You see, the divine has been speaking to you since before you knew what listening was. In the ache that told you you were meant for more. In the yearning that whispered there was something sacred in your sorrow. In the unexplainable pull toward people, places, paths that seemed irrational but felt like home. That was God. Not testing you, not confusing you. Guiding you through intuition back to yourself. And now, you are learning to trust that voice more than the noise. You are learning to follow what you feel, even when it goes against what you've been taught. You are learning to answer to your soul, not to your fears. And as you do, you become more than a seeker. You become an instrument, a vessel, a living prayer. Because prayer, beloved, is not just words. It is your breath. It is your stillness. It is your choices made in truth. And intuition is not a luxury. It is your native language. It is the divine loving you in real time, speaking through the whisper behind your thoughts, the knowing behind your mind. You are never without guidance. You are never without connection. You only believed you were. Now, you remember, and what you remember is peace. Not a peace dependent on circumstance, but one born of surrender. You stop needing guarantees and begin walking in trust. You stop needing the world to validate your direction, because your soul already has. You stop seeking the light and finally allow yourself to be it. The shift is not something you force, it is something you allow. The real you is not found, it is revealed. And it was never far, it was always here. Closer than breath, quieter than thought, more faithful than the sunrise. So now you bow not in defeat, but in devotion. You place your hand on your heart and know, I am not waiting for guidance, I am living it. I am not separate from God. I am the space through which God expresses. I am not becoming. I am remembering. And so, let your life become the prayer. Let your breath become the altar. Let your intuition become the voice of the divine rising from within. Let your stillness be the sanctuary. And let your presence be the answer to the prayer you once whispered into the sky. Because prayer is you talking to God. And intuition is God talking to you. And now, you are listening.